The footsteps were behind me again, soft but unmistakable, following as I moved through the hospital's deserted hallways. I told myself it was just an echo. But with each turn, I could swear the sounds drew closer, just out of reach. I forced myself to keep moving, gripping my flashlight tighter, knuckles white. The hospital was in the final stages of being shut down, its rooms emptied, equipment removed. They hadn't needed the night shift anymore, but I had agreed to come back. Years of working here had left me attached to the place, strange, I know. But tonight was just for old time's sake. I hadn't expected this unease. A hospital like this always had an eerie feel, but there was something wrong tonight, an electricity in the air that prickled my skin. I stopped outside a room I'd once known well. Room 13. The door was open, though I could have sworn it had been locked when I'd last left it. My breath misted in the cold, stagnant air. It didn't make sense. I'd never felt such a chill here, even in winter, even in the oldest parts of the building. I stepped inside, casting my flashlight's beam over the empty walls and rows of metal beds. The room looked so different now, stripped bare. Except, of course, for that familiar stain in the corner. A shiver ran through me as I stared at it. Dark and rusty, the shape looked almost like a body sprawled on the floor. I blinked, and for a moment I saw a person. A woman lying there, her eyes wide. Then she was gone, just a shadow again. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a fragment of an old memory lingering. But as I turned to leave, I heard a soft, whispering voice. "Why did you come back?" it asked, so close to my ear that I felt the breath on my neck. My heart hammered in my chest, and I stumbled out of the room. Outside, the hall was empty. My flashlight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to breathe, shifting like they had a life of their own. I took a shaky breath and pushed forward, trying to keep my focus. The steps behind me returned. A quick glance over my shoulder showed nothing, yet the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. I sped up, hoping to make it to the stairwell and escape the suffocating darkness. Just as I reached the stairs, a loud clattering echoed from below. I froze, pulse pounding, listening as the sound continued. An eerie, dragging shuffle, like something heavy being pulled along the tiles. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. And then, a soft, muffled giggle echoing up from the floor below. Every instinct told me to leave, but a twisted curiosity pushed me forward, one cautious step at a time, down the staircase. The cold deepened as I descended, until my breath came out in white clouds. The lower level was pitch black, the air stale and thick. The silence felt oppressive, like a weight pressing down on my chest. And then I heard it. Soft, childlike humming, drifting from the far end of the hallway. I moved forward, barely daring to breathe, each step a battle against the fear clawing at my throat. The humming grew louder, winding down the corridor like a serpent. The flashlight revealed an open door at the end. The humming stopped, leaving an awful silence in its wake. I was alone, but I felt eyes on me watching from the shadows. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw her, a little girl standing in the doorway staring at me with wide, hollow eyes. She wore a hospital gown, her hair tangled and dark, her skin too pale. "Are you lost?" I managed to choke out, my voice shaking. She tilted her head, her gaze unwavering, and then she smiled. It was a smile too wide, stretching far beyond what was humanly possible. A chill ran down my spine, and I took a step back. Her smile faded and her expression became cold, her hollow eyes fixed on me as if seeing something far away. "Don't leave," she whispered, her voice echoing through the empty hall. It was a command, chilling and absolute, freezing me in place. Suddenly a scream echoed down the corridor, so loud and piercing that I stumbled, nearly dropping the flashlight. The girl was gone, the door empty, but the scream continued, reverberating through the darkness. I spun around, desperate to escape, and ran back toward the stairwell, my steps echoing wildly in the empty building. But every time I looked back, the girl's hollow eyes followed, watching me. At the top of the stairs, I slammed through the door, breathless, only to find myself staring at the same hallway I had just left. It made no sense. The doors, the rooms, they were all the same. Panic clawed at me as I realized I was back at room 13. But I hadn't turned around. I hadn't retraced my steps. I couldn't explain it. A hand touched my shoulder. Cold, clammy fingers dug into my skin, and I turned, expecting to see her, the girl. But no one was there. The hallway was empty. My flashlight flickered again, casting twisted shadows along the walls. Then I heard it. A faint whisper. The same words echoing over and over. "Why did you come back? Why did you come back?" The walls felt like they were closing in, and the whisper grew louder, overlapping voices blending into a horrifying chant. I staggered back, pressing myself against the wall, heart racing. In the flickering light, I caught a glimpse of myself in a cracked mirror nearby. My face stared back, but there was something wrong. My eyes looked hollow, empty, as though I wasn't fully there. And then, in the reflection, she appeared beside me. Her pale face grinned, her hollow eyes locking onto mine. Her mouth moved, but it wasn't her voice I heard. It was mine. "Why did I come back?" I whispered, feeling the words slip from my own mouth as though they were someone else's. The room spun, reality slipping away, and a horrifying thought dawned on me. I wasn't alone because I had come back to find my things. I had come back because part of me had never left. The hospital, the darkness. It had claimed a piece of me, a part that would stay here forever. The girl reached out, her cold hand brushing my cheek as her hollow eyes drew me in. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. In that moment, I understood. I was the one haunting these halls, the one who never left. And now, I would remain here, part of this twisted memory, forever bound to these empty rooms. Drip, drip, drip. The sound echoed through the dark, abandoned corridors of St. Augustine Hospital. Samantha gripped her flashlight tightly, her knuckles white as she scanned her surroundings. Her weak flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness but only reached a few feet ahead. Each step was careful, measured. She had promised herself she'd never come back here. Yet here she was, desperate, searching for answers. She forced herself to keep going, each footfall stirring dust that had likely settled years before. St. Augustine had been closed for over 50 years. The town tried to forget the place, but legends of the hospital's haunted halls never faded. People claimed the hospital whispered, calling out to those who passed by. The building seemed to lure people in, wrapping them in an invisible grip. Samantha had dismissed those stories as a child. She'd never believed them. But last year, her sister Sophie had been fascinated, almost obsessed with them. Sophie was the type to chase adventure, always seeking the next thrill. She'd explored abandoned houses, eerie forests, but St. Augustine Hospital was different. One day, Sophie vanished. The police searched, combing through every room, every darkened corner. They found nothing. No sign of her at all. She had just disappeared. Samantha knew she shouldn't have let Sophie go alone, but her sister had been so confident. Now Samantha was left with an unbearable guilt. Her footsteps echoed hollow and loud, filling the silence. She felt as if something were listening, waiting in the shadows, holding its breath, ready to reveal itself. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step. She didn't know if it was the darkness, the stories, or if there was really something there. Her flashlight flickered, casting shadows that stretched across the walls like long skeletal fingers. She slapped it, willing it to stay steady, her nerves already frayed. The hallway ahead seemed endless, disappearing into darkness. Then, she noticed something on the wall. Stains, faint but unmistakable streaks of blood, smeared across the peeling paint. Her stomach turned as she stepped closer. The blood had dried, faded over time. She couldn't help but wonder who it had belonged to and what had happened here. The smell hit her next. Old decay mixed with antiseptic, a sickly sweet scent. It was suffocating, making her feel like she was inhaling death itself. Room after room lined the corridor. She peeked inside, seeing dust-covered beds and rusting medical equipment. The silence was oppressive, pressing in on her. Out of the corner of her eye, she thought she saw something dart past. She turned quickly, but the hallway was empty. Only shadows and darkness stared back at her. She swallowed hard and continued forward, her heart pounding. Her footsteps sounded too loud, like she was disturbing something that should have been left in peace. A shadow lingered at the end of the hall. Tall, unmoving, watching. Samantha held her breath, her fingers tightening around the flashlight as she tried to make it out. Lifting the beam, she saw nothing. The shadow was gone, as if it had never been there. But a chill ran down her spine, lingering in the air around her. Then, a voice, faint but clear. It was soft, barely more than a murmur, but she recognized it. Samantha. Her sister's voice. Sophie. Here. In this place. Sophie? She whispered, her voice cracking. She took a step forward, then another, following the voice. Her heart raced, her stomach twisting with both hope and dread. Ahead, a staircase led down to the basement. Shadows seemed to cling to the walls, reluctant to let any light pass through. From below, she saw a flash of movement. Her pulse quickened as she gripped the railing, descending each step carefully. The air grew colder with each step, the scent of mildew thick and suffocating. At the bottom, she saw a door, slightly ajar, flickering light spilling out. She moved closer, her heart pounding as she pushed the door open with a trembling hand. Inside, she saw monitors glowing, their green light casting eerie shadows. Despite the hospital being abandoned, these machines hummed, as if still connected to something. In the center of the room stood Sophie. Her sister's face was pale, her eyes wide and dark. She looked like a ghost, almost translucent. But Samantha's heart surged with hope. "Sophie," she called, her voice choked with relief and confusion. She moved toward her sister, reaching out, but her hand passed through Sophie's form like smoke. She staggered back, the realization hitting her like a wave of ice. Sophie wasn't alive. This was her spirit, trapped, lingering in these cursed halls. The monitors hummed louder, their screens flickering wildly. Shadows crept closer, like tendrils reaching out to envelop her. Samantha felt the weight of the hospital's presence. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing against her chest. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The hospital was alive, feeding on her fear, on her despair. She stumbled back, her flashlight flickering, casting a dim glow. Darkness swallowed the room, the shadows around her twisting and shifting, closing in on her. A voice, faint but insistent, filled her mind, a chorus of whispers blending into one. They echoed, relentless, a haunting lullaby she couldn't shake. She turned and ran, her footsteps pounding against the floor as she raced down the hall. But every turn led her back, twisting her in endless circles. The walls seemed to stretch, contorting, the hospital's layout changing as if it were alive, preventing her escape, trapping her within its grasp. Ahead, she saw the exit. She ran toward it, her heart pounding with desperate hope. She reached the door, pulling with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. Through the glass, she saw Sophie's face, her expression mournful. Sophie's lips moved, forming silent words that Samantha couldn't hear, but she could read them. "You're one of us now." Sophie's words sank in, chilling her to her core. Samantha felt her strength draining, her hope vanishing as despair flooded over her. Samantha screamed, her voice echoing through the hospital's empty halls. The silence swallowed it, absorbing the sound until all was quiet once more. Her vision blurred as the darkness crept in, swallowing her whole. She felt herself fading, becoming one with the hospital, like Sophie before her. Drip, drip, drip. The sound returned, filling the eerie silence. In the depths of St. Augustine Hospital, the whispers awaited the next soul to wander in. Jackson took a cautious step into the dark hallway of St. Mercy Hospital, his flashlight casting a weak beam through the thick dust hanging in the air. The abandoned hospital, on the edge of town, was infamous. Rumor had it that patients had been left to die, and souls were trapped here, restless and waiting. Jackson's friend Mark had dared him to spend the night here alone. At first, it sounded simple, but now he regretted his choice, feeling watched already. He had imagined the hospital would be creepy but lifeless. Yet in this silence, he felt something lurking, something alive, breathing in the darkness all around. A faint whisper seemed to drift through the hallway, almost calling his name. He stopped, straining to listen, heart pounding, though he told himself it was nothing. He shook off the unease and focused on his flashlight, which flickered slightly. The narrow beam barely pierced the darkness, making shadows dance ominously along the cracked walls. "Get it together, Jackson," he whispered, though his voice seemed to fade in the vast emptiness. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to take another step forward. Rows of hospital beds lined the corridor, rusted and covered in decayed sheets. One looked recently disturbed, as though someone had lain there just moments ago. A sickly, sweet stench lingered in the air, making his stomach churn. He tried to ignore it, swallowing his rising anxiety, telling himself it was just the smell of decay. Just then, his flashlight flickered again, casting an eerie, stuttering light along the hallway. He thought he heard a faint scraping sound, like something dragging in the distance. He froze, holding his breath as he listened. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence that seemed to close in on him from all directions, suffocating. He caught sight of a cracked mirror on the wall and saw his own pale face staring back. But behind him, in the reflection, was something else. Something shadowy. He spun around, heart hammering, but there was nothing there. Only darkness stretched before him, empty and silent. He cursed under his breath, gripping the flashlight tighter. Determined to reach the basement, where Mark had dared him to go, he continued forward. The flashlight beam flickered, casting shadows that seemed to shift, almost alive. Finally, he reached the door labeled basement. The handle felt ice cold against his skin, sending a shiver down his spine. He hesitated, feeling an overwhelming urge to turn back. But he was determined to see it through. His curiosity pushed him forward, and he twisted the handle, opening the door with a creak that echoed down the staircase. A cold draft greeted him as he stepped into the stairwell, carrying a faint metallic odor that made his stomach churn. The darkness below felt thick, impenetrable. With each step down, the walls seemed to close in, damp and covered in dark stains. Shadows clung to every corner, thick and foreboding, pressing in around him. The bottom of the staircase opened into a narrow corridor filled with the stale smell of rot. Pipes lined the ceiling, dripping condensation onto the cold, cracked floor. At the end of the hall, he saw the door labeled morgue. The faded letters looked almost bloody in the dim light. He swallowed hard, heart pounding. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door, revealing rows of metal slabs under dusty sheets. The air felt colder, heavier, as though something lingered here. In the center of the room, a single slab held a body, shrouded in a decaying sheet. He felt his stomach drop, fear twisting his insides, but he stepped closer. A whisper drifted through the room, soft and raspy, barely more than a breath. "Why did you come?" The words made his blood run cold, freezing him in place. He stumbled back, dropping his flashlight, which clattered to the floor. He turned to flee, but the door slammed shut, trapping him inside with the whispering darkness. He was trapped, his heart racing as he struggled with the handle. It wouldn't budge, and the shadows seemed to grow thicker, pressing in around him, almost alive. Cold fear crept up his spine as he heard footsteps echoing softly, deliberate and slow. Each step brought them closer, resonating in the silence, making his skin crawl. He felt something touch his shoulder, an ice-cold hand that gripped him tightly. He let out a strangled scream, yanking himself free and stumbling back into the darkness. The shadows pulsed and thickened around him, closing in. In the dim light, he saw a figure standing in the center of the room, its hollow eyes fixed on him. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered, voice laced with a sadness that felt ancient. Jackson's heart pounded as he realized he was face to face with a ghost. Desperately, he scrambled for his flashlight, lifting it toward the figure. But the light did nothing. The ghostly outline wavered, solid one moment, fading the next. He threw himself at the door, banging his shoulder against it, hoping it might open. But the door remained shut, as though sealed by an unseen force. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices that seemed to fill the room, surrounding him. He felt his strength drain as the cold seeped into his skin. In a final, desperate move, he screamed, hoping someone might hear. But the shadows swallowed his voice and the echo faded, leaving him alone with the darkness. Days later, searchers would enter St. Mercy and find only his flashlight lying dead on the basement floor. There was no sign of Jackson, just silence and shadows. St. Mercy claimed another victim, and the townsfolk spoke of the hospital's cursed halls, warning anyone tempted to enter. For once inside, no one ever truly left.